The rain hammered down on the cracked asphalt of Elmwood Street like a relentless drumbeat, turning the quiet suburban night into a blurred watercolor of shadows and sodium lights. It was just past midnight in the forgotten corners of Milford, where single-wide trailers huddled against the wind, their aluminum siding rattling like loose teeth. Inside one such home, a flicker of TV light spilled through the blinds, illuminating the small figure of Lily, a 17-year-old girl with a wheelchair that had become as much a part of her as her own skin. Her legs, weakened by a childhood illness that stole her mobility, ended in braces that gleamed dully under the lamp. But tonight, it wasn't the rain that made her tremble. It was the shouts echoing from the kitchen. Lily's voice cracked through the thin walls, raw and desperate. "Mom, Mom, please!" She wheeled herself forward, her hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles whitened. The front door was ajar, letting in the chill, and through it she could see the silhouettes on the porch, two burly men in cheap suits, their faces twisted in anger, voices booming like thunder. Her mother Grace stood between them and the house, her frail frame blocking the way. Grace was a nurse at the local clinic, her hands calloused from years of caring for others, but now those hands clutched a faded envelope, rent money scraped together from overtime shifts and odd jobs. "You can't do this," Grace pleaded, her voice steady but edged with fear. "We've paid what we could. Give us time." One of the men, a hulking figure with a scarred jaw, snatched the envelope and tore it open, counting the bills with a sneer. "Time's up, lady. The bank's done waiting." He shoved her aside, not hard, but enough to send her stumbling back against the doorframe. Grace hit the ground with a thud, her head glancing off the step, and a thin trickle of blood mixed with the rain pooling on the concrete. Lily's cry pierced the night. "My mom needs help!" It was a wail that carried on the wind, raw and unfiltered, echoing down the empty street like a siren's call. No neighbors stirred. In Milford, folks learned to mind their own, especially when eviction notices and debt collectors prowled like wolves. But the cry didn't fade into the downpour, unanswered. From the edge of the neighborhood, where the trailers gave way to a stretch of overgrown lots, came the low growl of engines, a symphony of Harleys awakening from slumber. Headlights pierced the gloom like searchlights, cutting through the sheets of rain. One by one, they rolled in, not in chaos, but with the precision of a military convoy. 75 strong, their leather vests patched with the fierce emblem of the Iron Vipers, a coiled serpent over crossed pistons. They surrounded the house in a tightening circle, the air filled with the scent of wet leather and exhaust, the rumble vibrating through the ground like an earthquake's prelude. At the forefront rode Jacob Hale, a weathered man in his late 40s, his salt and pepper beard framing a face etched with lines from old wounds. His eyes, sharp as flint under the brim of his helmet, locked on the scene unfolding. Jacob killed his engine first, the sudden silence amplifying the teen's sobs. He dismounted with the ease of someone who'd spent decades on the road, his boots splashing in puddles as he approached the porch. The debt collectors froze, their bravado evaporating like mist in the face of the wall of bikers. "What's this?" the scarred one barked, but his voice wavered. Jacob didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt beside Grace, his large hands gentle as he checked her pulse, then pressed a bandana to the cut on her forehead. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice gravelly from years of wind and smoke. "You all right?" Grace blinked up at him, dazed, her hand instinctively reaching for Lily's wheelchair at the door. It's nothing," Grace murmured, but her eyes widened at the sea of faces. Tough men and women, some with tattoos snaking up their necks, others with family photos tucked into vest pockets. They weren't here for trouble. Their postures were protective, shields raised against the storm. Lily wheeled closer, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They were going to take our home. Mom's been working double shifts. She can't lose this place." Jacob stood slowly, turning to the collectors. "You boys got names, or just numbers on a ledger?" The men backed away, hands raised. "This ain't your business," the second one stammered. "Bank's orders." Jacob's gaze hardened, a flicker of something ancient stirring in his chest, a promise from 20 years back, whispered in a foxhole halfway across the world. He'd lost his squad to a roadside blast, their laughter silenced forever, but he'd sworn to his dying brother-in-arms, "Watch out for the ones who can't fight back. Be the shield they need." That vow had faded with time, buried under miles of highway and the weight of regrets, until a chance encounter at the clinic 6 months ago. Grace had patched him up after a minor spill, no questions asked, and in her quiet strength he'd seen echoes of his own losses. He'd given her his card then, scribbled with a single word: promise. Tonight, that word had pulled him from his bed, rallying the vipers who'd become his chosen kin. "Walk away," Jacob said, his tone leaving no room for debate. The collectors exchanged glances, then bolted to their car, tires squealing as they fled into the rain. The bikers held their ground, a living barricade, until the taillights vanished. Only then did Jacob turn back to the women. "We're not leaving you like this," he told Grace, helping her to her feet. Lily's eyes, wide with a mix of fear and awe, met his. "Why? We don't even know you." Jacob smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Sometimes, kid, that's how the best promises start, unspoken but ironclad." As the rain eased to a drizzle, the vipers began to move, some fetching medical kits from saddlebags, others pulling tarps to cover the leaking roof. Jacob sat with Lily on the porch, listening to her story. The mounting bills after her dad's abandonment, the clinic's threats to cut Grace's hours, the wheelchair that needed repairs they couldn't afford. Each word chipped away at the walls Jacob had built around his heart, reminding him that honor wasn't forged in battles won, but in the quiet stands against the tide. By dawn, as the first light gilded the horizon, the house was secure, a temporary fortress of loyalty. But Jacob knew this was just the beginning. Shadows loomed larger than debt collectors, and the promise he'd revived demanded more than one night's ride. The air hummed with possibility, the scent of coffee brewing inside, mingling with the fading petrol tang. Jacob glanced at his crew, brothers and sisters in leather, their faces illuminated by the rising sun. They'd ride again, he sensed, for this fragile family on the edge. And in that unspoken pact, redemption whispered on the wind, a chance to heal old scars with new purpose. The first rays of dawn crept over Milford like a hesitant promise, painting the trailers in hues of gold and rust. The rain had surrendered to a crisp morning mist that clung to the ground, carrying the earthy scent of wet soil mixed with the lingering bite of motorcycle exhaust. Inside the modest home on Elmwood Street, the air was warmer now, infused with the aroma of strong coffee percolating on the stove, and the faint, comforting tang of antiseptic from the medical kits the Iron Vipers had unpacked. Grace sat at the scarred kitchen table, a clean bandage wrapped around her forehead, her hands cradling a mug that one of the bikers, a sturdy woman named Elena, with a tattoo of a phoenix rising on her forearm, had pressed into her palms. Lily wheeled beside her, her braces catching the light as she reached for her mother's hand, the fear in her eyes softening to something like fragile hope. Jacob Hale leaned against the doorframe, his leather vest creaking softly as he crossed his arms. He'd sent most of the crew out to patrol the perimeter, their engines idling low like watchful guardians, but a core group remained. Elena, who doubled as the club's medic after years patching up road rash and worse. Marcus, a broad-shouldered veteran with a quiet laugh that hid his own ghosts from overseas tours, and a few others who'd ridden through the night without question. They moved with purpose, not intrusion, nailing down loose shingles on the roof, checking the wheelchair's worn tires, sharing stories in low tones that filled the space without overwhelming it. We've all been there, Marcus said to Lily as he adjusted a hydraulic lift on her chair, his voice steady like the hum of a well-tuned engine. Cornered by folks who think money's the only currency, but loyalty, that's what keeps the wheels turning. Grace sipped her coffee, her gaze flickering to Jacob. I remember you from the clinic, she said softly, the words pulling him back to that rainy afternoon 6 months prior. He'd wiped out on a slick curve, nothing major, just a gash on his knee and a bruised ego. But she'd cleaned it without fuss, her touch efficient yet kind. In the quiet of the exam room, amid the beep of monitors and the sterile scent of iodine, he'd shared a fragment of his past. The brother-in-arms lost to that blast, the vow to protect the vulnerable. Promise, he'd muttered, sliding her the card. She'd nodded then, as if understanding the weight of unspoken oaths. Now, in the light of day, that moment felt like the spark that had ignited this improbable alliance. But peace was fleeting in Milford. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard, a black sedan pulled up to the curb with the deliberate slowness of authority. Out stepped Detective Harlan Reed, a man in his mid-50s with a starched shirt that strained against his gut and eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. He wasn't alone. 2 uniforms flanked him, their hands resting casually on their belts. The Vipers tensed outside, engines revving once in warning. But Jacob raised a hand, signaling calm. This wasn't a brawl waiting to happen. It was the creeping shadow of the system, the kind that wore badges and wielded paperwork like weapons. "Mr. Hale," Reed said, his voice clipped as he climbed the porch steps, ignoring the bikers' stares. "Heard about your little midnight parade. Eviction's a civil matter. Interfering could be seen as obstruction." He glanced at Grace and Lily, his expression a mask of professional concern that didn't reach his eyes. Jacob stepped forward, his boots thudding softly on the wood. "No interference, Detective. Just neighbors lending a hand. Mom here took a fall. Nothing more." Reed's lips thinned, and he pulled a folder from under his arm, flipping it open to reveal grainy photos. The collector's car, fleeing the circle of bikes under the streetlights. Banks pressing charges, harassment. And word is, your club's been stirring up trouble across county lines. Old debts from that warehouse dust up last year. The air thickened, the mist evaporating under the rising heat. Jacob's jaw tightened, memories surfacing like ghosts on the horizon. The warehouse raid that had exposed a ring of corrupt officials siphoning funds from community aid, funds meant for families like Grace's. The Vipers had tipped off the right people, but not without fallout, whispers of retaliation, licenses pulled, shadows following their rides. It was justice, raw and unpolished. But to men like Reed, it was a threat to the order they guarded. "We're clean," Jacob replied evenly, his voice carrying the gravel of roads traveled, "helping where it's needed. You got a problem with that?" Reed's gaze shifted to Lily, who gripped her mother's arm, her wheelchair positioned like a shield. "Kid's got enough on her plate without outsiders complicating things. Bank's got rights, foreclosure's law." Grace stood slowly, her voice gaining strength. "Law? They've been hounding us for months, ignoring our payments. And now this, after what happened last night." She trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging. The collectors weren't just enforcers. Rumors swirled of ties to higher-ups, officials turning a blind eye for kickbacks. Reed shrugged, a calculated indifference. "File a complaint if you want, but stirring up a biker army, that's going to bring more heat than help." Eleanor stepped inside then, her presence a quiet anchor, handing Grace a list of pro bono lawyers from the club's network, folks who'd fought similar battles for veterans and single parents. Marcus lingered by the door, his eyes on the uniforms, ready if words turned to actions. Jacob met Reed's stare, the silence stretching like the pause before a storm. In that moment the detective saw it, not defiance, but resolve, the kind forged in loss and tempered by time. "Tell your bosses," Jacob said finally. "We're not going anywhere, not while promises are on the line." Reed hesitated, then snapped the folder shut, turning back to his car. "This ain't over, Hale. Watch your backs." As the sedan drove off, dust kicking up in its wake, the Vipers gathered closer, their murmurs a low rumble of solidarity. Lily looked up at Jacob, her voice small but steady. "They're not gonna stop, are they?" He knelt to her level, the scent of leather and resolve enveloping her. "Maybe not, but neither are we. That vow I carry. It's for moments like this, standing firm when the world's trying to knock you down." Grace nodded, tears glistening but unshed as the group planned their next move, digging into the bank's records, rallying allies from old war circles. The morning unfolded with purpose, the house no longer a fragile outpost, but a bastion of chosen kin. Yet beneath the unity, doubt flickered in Jacob's chest, a whisper of the cost. How far would they ride to shield this family, and what shadows from his past might follow? The engines outside purred to life, a call to the road ahead, where loyalty would be tested in the fire of truth. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The midday sun beat down on Milford like a forge hammer, turning the air thick and shimmering over the cracked pavement of Elmwood Street. The mist from the morning had burned off, leaving behind a haze that carried the faint, acrid scent of overheated asphalt and distant wildflowers pushing through the gravel. Inside the trailer, the kitchen felt smaller now, crowded with the quiet energy of the Iron Viper's inner circle. Maps and scribbled notes spread across the table like battle plans, illuminated by the harsh glow of a laptop screen borrowed from Elena's saddlebag. Grace hovered nearby, pouring fresh coffee into mismatched mugs, her movements deliberate, as if grounding herself in the normalcy of hospitality. Lily sat close, her wheelchair angled toward the group, fingers tracing the edge of a photo album she'd pulled from a shelf. Faded pictures of better days, before the illness and the debts had carved their marks. Jacob paced the narrow space, his boots scuffing softly against the linoleum, the weight of Reed's parting words echoing in his mind like the echo of a distant thunder. Obstruction. Harassment. The detective's folder had been a veiled warning, a reminder that the system's gears ground slowly but inexorably, crushing those who dared to jam them. But Jacob had seen corruption before, back in the dust-choked valleys overseas, where promises meant survival and betrayal came wrapped in official seals. He'd buried too many brothers to back down now. "We start with the source," he said, stopping to lean over the table, his finger jabbing at a printout of the local branch's details. "That bank ain't just collecting rent, they're bleeding folks dry. Elena, you got contacts in the financial aid circles?" Elena nodded, her phoenix tattoo flexing as she typed rapidly on the laptop. Years as a nurse in underfunded clinics had taught her the labyrinth of red tape, the ways money vanished into pockets lined with influence. "Got a friend at the Community Oversight Board. Says there's whispers of falsified records. Families like yours, Grace, paying double what they owe because of fees that don't add up." Her voice was steady, laced with the quiet fury of someone who'd bandaged wounds inflicted by indifference. Marcus, wiping grease from his hands after tinkering with Lily's wheelchair outside, chimed in from the doorway. "And those collectors? Plates trace back to a shell company out of the city. Smells like the same crew that strong-armed the aid warehouse last year. We tipped the feds then, but it only scratched the surface." Grace set a mug in front of Jacob, her eyes meeting his with a gratitude that bordered on resolve. "I thought it was just bad luck. My hours cut, the wheelchair parts delayed. But if it's bigger... She trailed off, glancing at Lily, who was absorbing every word like a sponge, her young face hardening with a determination that belied her fragility. The teen had always been the fighter, wheeling through school hallways with a defiance that turned stares into respect. But this threat felt personal, a siege on the fragile world she'd built. "They can't take this from us," Lily said, her voice gaining strength. "Not after everything. Dad left the clinic squeezing Mom. If we lose the house, where do we go?" Jacob knelt beside her, the scent of coffee mingling with the leather of his vest. "Nowhere, kid. Not on our watch. That promise I mentioned? It's like the ones we make on the road. Simple words, but they bind tighter than chains." The planning shifted into motion as the afternoon wore on, the sun slanting through the windows in golden shafts that caught the dust motes dancing like fireflies. Marcus and a handful of Vipers headed out to scout the bank branch, their bikes rumbling away in a low convoy that turned heads on the main drag. Elena stayed, helping Grace sort through bills and statements, uncovering discrepancies that pointed to manipulated ledgers, overcharges disguised as penalties, signatures forged on extension forms. Jacob sat with Lily on the porch, the wood creaking under their weight as she shared more of her story. The illness had come swift when she was 10, a fever that ravaged her nerves and left her legs unresponsive. But it was the aftermath that scarred deepest. Hospital stays that drained their savings, a father who vanished under the pressure, leaving Grace to shoulder it all with quiet grit. "Mum never complains," Lily said, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the Viper's dust trail faded. "But I see it in her eyes, like she's carrying the whole world." Jacob listened, the words stirring echoes of his own losses, the blast that took his squad, the guilt that rode shotgun on every mile since. He'd wandered after the service, drifting through biker life as a way to outrun the silence, until the Vipers gave him purpose. A family forged in chrome and oaths, where weakness was met with support, not scorn. "Your mum's strong," he replied, his voice low and measured. "Stronger than most. But even the toughest engines need a tune-up. That's what we're here for." Lily smiled faintly, the first real one since the night before, a spark of trust igniting in the space between them. But the fragile calm shattered as evening approached, the sky bruising to purples and oranges. A county cruiser pulled up unannounced, its lights flashing silently. No siren, just the weight of authority amplified. Out stepped not Reed, but a higher rung. Sheriff Landon Cole, a silver-haired man with a moustache that hid his smirks and eyes that scanned like appraisals. He carried no folder this time, just a rolled-up notice that he unfurled with deliberate slowness. The remaining Vipers outside straightened, hands loose but ready, while Jacob rose from the porch, positioning himself between the sheriff and the door. "Cole," Jacob acknowledged, recognizing him from town hall meetings where the man preached law and order with a selective blindness. "Hail," Cole returned, his tone oily smooth. "Heard you've been playing knight in shining leather. Banks filed a formal complaint, trespass, intimidation, and with your club's history." He let the implication hang, glancing at the viper patches visible through the open door. Inside, Grace froze, Lily wheeling closer to her side. Cole's visit wasn't random. It reeked of coordination, the kind that linked badges to boardrooms. "This is private property," Jacob said evenly, stepping down to meet him on even ground. "We were invited. Helping out after an incident. You here to assist or just deliver papers?" Cole's eyes narrowed, the notice crinkling in his grip. "Incident? More like a circus? Look, I get it. Good intentions. But stirring this up draws eyes. Bad ones. The bank's connected, Hale. Folks who don't like loose ends." The warning was clear. Back off, or face the machine's full grind. Jacob held his ground, the air between them charged like the pause before ignition. Elena appeared at the door, her medic bag slung over her shoulder as if prepared for fallout. while Marcus's bike engine growled to life in the distance, a signal that reinforcements were en route. Cole hesitated, then thrust the notice into Jacob's hand. Eviction hearing set for Friday. Show up if you want, but leave the parade at home. He retreated to his cruiser, the engine purring to life with a dismissive rev. As the taillights faded, Jacob unrolled the paper. The ink stark against the yellowed stock, demands for back payments inflated beyond reason, threats of immediate seizure. The Vipers reconvened inside, faces grim but unyielding. "They're closing the net," Marcus said, arriving back with news of guards posted at the bank, whispers of off-the-books deals shielding the corruption. Grace clutched Lily's hand, her voice trembling but fierce. "We fight this, all of us." Jacob nodded, folding the notice away. The promise burned brighter now, a beacon against the encroaching dark. But as night fell, stars pricking the velvet sky, he wondered how deep the rot went, and if upholding his vow would demand a sacrifice none of them were ready for. The trailer lights flickered on, casting warm pools against the gathering shadows, while outside, the bikes formed a vigilant ring. Loyalty wasn't just words, it was the stand they took now, against forces that twisted justice into knots. Yet in Jacob's chest, the old scars ached, a reminder that redemption came laced with risk, and the road ahead twisted sharper than any he'd ridden. Night settled over Milford like a heavy blanket, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds that promised more rain. The trailer's interior glowed with the soft hum of fluorescent bulbs, casting elongated shadows across the cluttered kitchen where the Iron Vipers huddled around the table. The air was thick with the aroma of reheated stew, canned beef and potatoes Elena had warmed on the stove, mingling with the sharper edge of marker ink from the maps now marked with red circles around key locations, the bank branch, the sheriff's office, and a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts rumoured to house off-the-books dealings. Jacob unfolded the eviction notice again, its edges fraying under his thumb, the words blurring slightly in the dim light, but no less threatening. Grace sat across from him, her face pale but composed, Lily dozing fitfully in her wheelchair nearby, exhaustion finally claiming her after the day's strain. The teen's braces caught a glint from the lamp, a silent testament to battles already fought. "Friday's too soon," Grace whispered, her voice laced with the quiet desperation of someone who'd balanced ledgers too many times. "They've stacked it, extra fees, late notices we never got. It's like they're erasing us on purpose." Jacob nodded, his salt and pepper beard shadowing his jaw as he traced a line on the map to the city prosecutor's office. The Vipers had allies there, old contacts from veteran support groups who'd seen the same patterns. Families squeezed until they broke, homes flipped for profit, while officials looked the other way. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his bulk, his eyes distant, as if replaying memories from dusty patrols overseas. "Sheriff Cole's not just a messenger boy," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tension. "I tailed his cruiser after he left, met up with one of those collectors at a diner off Route 17. Handshake, envelope exchange, classic payoff." Elena, wiping her hands on a dish towel, added her piece, her medic's precision sharpening her words. "And the clinic?" Grace mentioned cuts to her hours. "I pulled strings. Turns out funding's being rerouted through a community development fund tied to the same bank. It's a web, Jacob. Pull one thread, and it might unravel everything, or snap back." Jacob's mind raced, the promise from that foxhole 20 years ago resurfacing like a tide. His brother-in-arms, face smeared with grit, had gripped his shoulder in the dying light. "If I don't make it, Hale, you carry this. Shield the ones the world forgets." Jacob had nodded then, the weight settling like shrapnel he couldn't dig out. Now, in this cramped trailer, it felt alive again. A vow not just to protect, but to expose the rot that preyed on the vulnerable. He stood, the chair scraping back, and moved to the window, peering out at the circle of bikes gleaming under the security light. The Vipers on watch nodded back, their silhouettes steadfast sentinels against the encroaching dark. "We hit the hearing prepared," Jacob decided, turning to the group. "But we don't wait for their courtroom games. Elena, reach out to that oversight contact. Get us proof of the falsified records. Marcus, rally the outriders. We need eyes on that warehouse tonight." Grace rose, placing a hand on his arm, her touch light but anchoring. "You don't have to do this alone. We've got nothing left to lose, but you. Your club could get dragged down." Jacob met her gaze, seeing the echo of his own regrets in her eyes. The years of scraping by, the quiet sacrifices for a child who needed more than the world gave. "Family's not blood, Grace. It's the ones who ride when you call. And last night, that was your call." As the group dispersed into action, the night deepened, the distant hum of engines signaling the scouts departing. Jacob stepped outside onto the porch, the cool air carrying the scent of damp earth and faint ozone from the clouds. Lily stirred inside, wheeling to the door with a soft whir, her eyes blinking open. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her on the steps, the wood groaning under his weight. She shook her head, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Dreaming about Dad again. He promised he'd fix my chair. Take us away from all this, but promises break, don't they?" Jacob paused, the words striking like gravel under tires. "Some do. The weak ones, made without heart. But the real ones, they bend, they scar, but they hold, like the road, full of potholes, but it gets you where you need to be." Lily leaned her head against the doorframe, the vulnerability in her posture pulling at him. "Why us? Why now?" Jacob glanced at the horizon, where faint headlights winked like fireflies, the Vipers moving in the shadows. "Because I see my squad in you two, folks fighting invisible wars day after day. That blast took them, but it left me this." He tapped his chest, over the patch where his heart beat steady. "A chance to make it mean something." She nodded slowly, a tentative smile breaking through, as if the weight of the world lightened just a fraction in the sharing. Inside, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a lead. Digital footprints linking the bank's manager to shell accounts, siphoning aid meant for clinics and families. Marcus radioed in from the warehouse perimeter. Guards, yes, but sloppy ones, crates stamped with municipal seals. The pieces were aligning, a mosaic of corruption that extended from Elmwood Street to the county's core. But as midnight approached, a new rumble cut the quiet. Not friendly engines, but the wail of sirens approaching fast. Headlights flooded the yard, 3 cruisers screeching to a halt, doors flying open to reveal Reed and a squad of deputies, shotguns racked but not raised. "Hail!" Reed barked, stepping forward with a warrant flapping in his hand. "Search for evidence of conspiracy. Stand down, or we do this the hard way." The Vipers formed a line, engines roaring in unison, a wall of thunder that vibrated through the ground. Jacob rose slowly, positioning himself at the forefront, his voice calm amid the storm. "On what grounds, Detective? Helping a family ain't a crime." Reed's face twisted, the lights casting harsh shadows. "Anonymous tip. Stolen documents. Threats against officials. Your club's prints all over it." It was a bluff, Jacob sensed, but laced with truth. Someone was tightening the noose, using the law as a garrote. Grace appeared at the door, Lily behind her, the air electric with the standoff's tension. Jacob's hand went to his belt, not for a weapon, but to signal restraint. The promise demanded justice, not blood, exposing the lies, not fueling the fire. "Search if you must," he said evenly, "but know this. We're not the villains here." The deputies advanced, flashlights sweeping, but in their eyes flickered doubt, the kind that came from knowing the badge sometimes shielded the wrong side. As they rummaged through saddlebags and the trailer's outer sheds, finding nothing but tools and aid kits, the night held its breath. Elena whispered to Grace, "This is their fear talking. We've got them rattled." Dawn was hours away, but the confrontation stretched, a psychological siege under the stars. Jacob watched Reed, seeing the man's own fractures, the tired slump, the glance away from Lily's wheelchair. Corruption didn't just rot institutions, it hollowed men. When the deputies finally withdrew empty-handed, Reed lingered, his voice low. "This ends bad for everyone, Hale. Walk away." Jacob shook his head, the first drops of rain pattering down. "Not when honor's at stake. Tell your bosses. The truth rides harder than any lie." As the cruisers retreated, the Vipers exhaled, engines idling down to a protective purr. Inside, the group regrouped, the night's revelations fueling their resolve. Lily wheeled forward, her voice steady. "We keep going, right?" Jacob nodded, the rain tracing paths down his face like tears unshed. The road to Friday's hearing loomed, fraught with traps, but the promise burned undimmed, a light against the gathering storm. Yet in the quiet aftermath, Jacob felt the pull of old shadows, whispers that his stand might cost more than he'd bargained, testing the very bonds that held them. If this story's stirring something in you, hit that like button. It helps spread these tales of quiet courage far and wide. The rain fell in earnest now, a steady patter that drummed against the trailer's roof like impatient fingers, turning the yard into a slick mosaic of mud and reflected headlights. The Iron Vipers stood their ground outside, rain beading on their leather vests like scattered diamonds, their engines a low, defiant growl that drowned out the retreating sirens. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp wood and cooling stew, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead as Jacob wiped rain from his face and stepped back through the door. Grace pulled Lily closer, her arm a protective arc around the wheelchair. While Elena busied herself stowing the maps, her movements precise to mask the tremor in her hands. Jacob's boots left wet prints on the linoleum as he crossed to the table, the eviction notice now sodden and curling at the edges. The search had been thorough, deputies rifling through toolboxes and saddlebags, flashlights probing corners like accusatory eyes, but they'd found nothing incriminating. Just the quiet evidence of lives lived on the edge. Spare parts, first aid supplies, a worn Bible tucked into Marcus's kit with passages underlined in faded ink. Reed's bluff had cracked under scrutiny, but the detective's parting words lingered like exhaust fumes, a warning that the noose was tightening. "They're desperate," Jacob said, his voice gravelly as he shook out his jacket. "Pushing hard means we're close to something they want buried." Marcus nodded from the doorway, water dripping from his broad shoulders, his face etched with the weariness of a man who'd stared down worse storms in foreign sands. "Warehouse run paid off. Crates inside, sealed docks, looks like altered ledgers, tied to the bank's shell accounts, and get this. Signatures matching clinic funding reroutes. We snapped photos, but guards are doubling up now." He pulled a small drive from his pocket, handing it to Elena, who slotted it into the laptop with a click that echoed in the tense quiet. Grace leaned over her shoulder, eyes scanning the grainy images, her breath catching at the familiar forms, her own payment stubs, twisted into proof of debts that never existed. Lily wheeled forward, the soft whir of her chair cutting through the rain's rhythm, her blanket sodden but clutched tight. "So it's all fake? Everything they've said?" Her voice held a mix of outrage and wonder, the innocence of youth clashing with the harsh lines the world had etched around her eyes. Jacob knelt again, bringing himself to her level, the scent of wet leather mingling with the earthy dampness seeping through the cracks. "Not everything, kid. The pain's real. The shifts your mom pulled, the nights you worried. But the chains they're wrapping around you? Those are illusions, built on lies. We're going to shine a light on them." The group settled into the small hours, the rain easing to a drizzle that tapped insistently at the windows like a metronome counting down to dawn. Elena's fingers flew across the keys, compiling the evidence into a digital dossier. Timestamps on the photos, cross-referenced with public records pulled from discrete online archives, painting a picture of systematic graft that snaked from the bank to the sheriff's office and beyond. "This goes to the hearing," she murmured, her phoenix tattoo seeming to flicker in the screen's glow. "Prosecutors got to see it. Anonymous drop if we have to, but clean." Marcus paced, his bulk casting long shadows, recounting the warehouse details in hushed tones, the guards' radios crackling with coded chatter, the faint outline of a safe cracked open just enough to reveal stacks of envelopes, payoffs wrapped in the guise of donations. Grace rose to brew more coffee, the pot hissing on the stove, steam curling like ghosts in the air. Her hands, steady from years of suturing wounds at the clinic, now trembled slightly as she poured. "I bandaged that bank manager once, cut from a bar fight. He joked about easy money in real estate. I thought nothing of it then." Her words hung, a thread pulling at the tapestry of betrayal, reminding them all how corruption hid in plain sight, dressed as neighborly smiles and firm handshakes. Jacob watched her, seeing the weight she carried, the single-parent grit that mirrored his own post-war drift, the quiet vow to endure for the sake of the ones you loved. "You did your part, Grace. Now we do ours." As the first grey light filtered through the blinds, painting the room in muted tones, Lily stirred from a shallow doze, her eyes locking on Jacob with a newfound clarity. "That promise you keep talking about. It's like what Mom does every day, right? Holding on, even when it hurts." He nodded, the words striking deep, evoking the foxhole's dim light, where his brother in arms had whispered his last charge. "Exactly. It's the glue that keeps families, chosen or not, from falling apart. Your mom's been living it. Now we're riding with her." The teen reached out, her small hand clasping his calloused one, a silent pact forming in that touch, fragile yet unbreakable. But resolve was tested as morning broke fully, the sun piercing the clouds in hesitant shafts that turned the puddles to mirrors. A knock echoed, sharp, official, rattling the door before Jacob could signal the watch. Through the peephole, they saw a courier in a crisp uniform, envelope in hand, flanked by an unmarked van idling at the curb. Elena cracked the door, her stance blocking the view inside. "Delivery for Grace Harlan," the man said flatly, thrusting the packet forward. She took it warily, signing with a pen that scratched like claws on paper. Inside, a court summons acceleration, eviction expedited to tomorrow, citing public safety concerns after the disturbance. Attached was a restraining order against the Vipers, barring them from the property or proceedings, penned in Cole's looping script. The air in the trailer thickened, outrage simmering like the coffee left too long on the burner. "They're scared," Marcus growled, crumpling the edge of the paper. "Pushing the hearing up means they think we can't scramble." Jacob's jaw set, the old scars on his knuckles whitening as he gripped the table. This wasn't just procedure, it was a gambit to isolate Grace and Lily, to silence the voices before they roared. "We adapt. Elena, get that dossier to our contact. Full speed. Marcus, round up the legal eagles from the vet network. We're crashing that hearing, order or not." Grace clutched the summons, her face paling, but Lily's voice cut through, fierce and unyielding. "No, they don't get to scare us off. We go together." The morning unfolded in a blur of calls and preparations, the Vipers mobilizing like a well-oiled machine, bikes fueled, routes mapped to avoid patrols, allies alerted from distant chapters. Jacob stepped outside, the ground squelching underfoot, inhaling the fresh-washed scent of rain-soaked earth. The circle of riders waited, engines purring in anticipation, their faces a mosaic of determination, tattoos faded by time, eyes sharp with shared purpose. He'd led them through bar brawls and border runs, but this felt deeper, a stand for the invisible battles that scarred souls more than shrapnel ever could. As they mounted up, the rumble built to a thunderous chorus, vibrating through the trailer walls. Grace and Lily watched from the porch, the wheelchair positioned front and center, a symbol of defiance. "Thank you," Grace called over the din, her voice carrying on the wind. Jacob revved his Harley once, a nod of acknowledgement, before leading the convoy out, 75 strong, cutting through Milford's waking streets like a river of chrome and resolve. The hearing loomed, a coliseum of words and wills where truth would clash against the machine. But in Jacob's chest, the promise thrummed steady, a heartbeat against the storm, pulling them toward reckoning. Yet, as the miles unspooled, doubt whispered at the edges. What if the web was too tangled, the sacrifices too steep? The road twisted ahead, demanding everything, and Jacob rode into it with eyes wide open, honor his only compass. The courthouse in Milford loomed like a weathered sentinel under the midday sun, its stone facade scarred by decades of wind and rain, steps worn smooth by the feet of the desperate and the damned. The air hummed with the low thrum of engines as the Iron Viper's convoy rolled in, a river of chrome and leather carving through the parking lot, drawing stares from clerks and passers-by who paused mid-stride. 75 riders dismounted in unison, their boots crunching gravel, vests gleaming with the coiled serpent emblem that spoke of bonds forged in fire. Jacob Hale led the way, his Harley still ticking with residual heat as he scanned the crowd, locals milling about, a few reporters with notepads at the ready, and the unmistakable bulk of Sheriff Cole's cruiser parked curbside, lights off but presence heavy. Inside, the hearing room smelled of polished oak and stale coffee, the kind that lingered from too many long nights. Grace wheeled Lily through the heavy doors, the chair's tires whispering over the tile, her hand tight on the armrest as if anchoring them both. Elena flanked them, her medic bag slung like a shield, while Marcus brought up the rear, a folder of printed evidence tucked under his arm. The room was sparse, benches half filled with bank suits in starched collars, the judge's bench elevated like a throne, and at the front, the bank's attorney, a slick man named Harlan with a tie too tight for his flushed face. Cole lounged in the back row, his moustache twitching as he nodded to the deputies stationed by the exits. Jacob entered last, his presence drawing the room's breath inward. He wasn't alone. A dozen Vipers filed in behind, filling the seats without a word, their silence more commanding than shouts. The judge, a stern woman named Ellis with silver-streaked hair pinned back, rapped her gavel once, the sound sharp as a starter pistol. "This is an expedited eviction proceeding for the Harlan residence. Counsel, proceed." The bank's attorney rose, his voice oily with rehearsed authority. "Your Honor, the defendants have defaulted on multiple payments, compounded by disturbances that pose a public safety risk. We seek immediate possession." Grace stood as called, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We've paid what we could, overtime, side jobs. These fees appeared out of nowhere." Lily gripped her mother's sleeve, her braces catching the fluorescent light, eyes fixed on the bench with a defiance that silenced whispers. But the attorney waved a sheaf of papers, forged timestamps glaring. "Records don't lie, ma'am. And last night's incident, witnesses saw intimidation by an unauthorized group." His gaze flicked to Jacob, accusatory. That's when Marcus stood, the folder slapping the table like a gauntlet thrown. "With respect, Your Honor, these records do lie." He spread the photos and dossiers, warehouse crates, ledger discrepancies, digital trails, linking the bank to rerouted funds. Elena added her testimony, her nurse's precision cutting through, clinic aids siphoned for development that lines pockets, not helps families. Mrs. Harlan's hours cut because of it. The room stirred, murmurs rising like steam from a kettle. The attorney blustered, objecting on technicalities, but Judge Ellis leaned forward, her eyes narrowing on the evidence. "This alleges fraud on a systemic scale. Bailiff, secure these documents for review." Cole shifted in his seat, his face paling as reporters scribbled furiously. Jacob remained seated, his posture unyielding, but inside the foxhole promise surged, a vow not for glory, but for the quiet victory of truth over shadows. He'd ridden through the night to deliver this, rallying the vipers who'd become his redemption, each mile a step away from the ghosts of lost brothers. Grace met his gaze across the room, a nod of profound thanks passing between them, while Lily's shoulders relaxed fractionally, the weight of fear lifting like fog in the sun. The hearing dragged into the afternoon, the sun slanting through high windows in golden bars that warmed the cool chamber. Cross-examinations revealed cracks. The attorney fumbling dates, the bank's manager called as a witness, sweating under Elena's pointed questions about donations to Cole's campaign. Whispers spread, reporters texting leads, locals exchanging glances of dawning realization. When the judge called a recess, the air crackled with tension, deputies hovering as if expecting a brawl. Outside in the hall, Jacob pulled Grace aside, the scent of her simple soap cutting through the institutional staleness. "This might not end today," he said, his voice low, "but it started. The promise holds." She touched his arm, her eyes glistening. "You've given us more than a shield, Jacob. A family." Lily wheeled up, her voice soft but sure. "Like the ones you lost. We're not letting go either." The words mended something in him, a scar tissue tearing to reveal healing beneath, the redemption not in vengeance, but in standing firm, honoring the vulnerable with unyielding loyalty. When court reconvened, Judge Ellis's gavel fell like judgment. "Based on the presented evidence, this eviction is stayed pending full investigation into alleged irregularities. The Harlan residence remains occupied. Furthermore, I am notifying the state prosecutor's office of potential misconduct by involved parties." The bank's attorney deflated, Cole bolting from his seat with a curse under his breath, deputies escorting him out amid flashes from cameras. Cheers erupted from the Viper's side, subdued but electric, a wave of relief washing over the room. As the family emerged into the sunlight, the convoy waited, engines idling like a heartbeat. Jacob helped Grace down the steps, Lily's chair bumping gently over the threshold. The air carried the sweet tang of victory, exhaust mingling with blooming jasmine from the courthouse lawn. Reporters swarmed briefly, but the Vipers formed a respectful cordon, guiding them to safety. "It's over?" Lily asked, the sun warming her face. Jacob shook his head, a faint smile cracking his beard. "Not over. Just the beginning. The rot runs deep, but we've got the light now." They rode back to Elmwood Street in formation, the rumble a triumphant symphony echoing through Milford's veins. At the trailer, the crew dismounted, sharing handshakes and quiet toasts with bottled water and fresh coffee. Grace invited them in, the space now feeling less like a besieged outpost and more like home. Walls shored up, roof patched, hearts fortified. Jacob lingered on the porch with Lily, watching the sun dip low, painting the horizon in fire. "That cry of yours last night," he said. "It woke more than engines. It woke promises we'd forgotten." She nodded, the wheelchair's armrest cool under her hand. "And yours saved us." In that exchange, the family chosen solidified, bikers, nurse, teen, a circle unbreakable against the world's cynicism. Jacob mounted his bike as dusk fell, the Vipers peeling away one by one, but not before Eleanor slipped Grace a card. "Call any time. We're kin now." The engines faded into the twilight, leaving behind the scent of possibility, the echo of loyalty's roar. Jacob rode into the gathering night, the road unspooling like a healed wound, his vow fulfilled not in isolation, but shared. Redemption wasn't a solitary path, it was the ride taken together, honoring the lost with lives lifted. Milford slept easier that night, shadows retreating before the dawn of justice earned through quiet courage. Thank you for joining us on this journey of unbreakable promises and chosen family. If these stories of honor and heart move you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more tales of quiet heroes riding the edge of redemption waiting just for you.